Consider supporting Archaeosoup on Patreon for as little as $1 per month. Link available in the video description. Thank you.
Testing. Yeah, I think this is working. Okay. This is dispatch C78AM, Moon Recon Station, designation Glean, forward Archaeological Assessment Unit, beginning transmission. It has been some time since our last transmission, as we have been following a lockdown protocol following an outbreak of a new strain of the moon flu. But we're back and we're ready to continue our assessment of the old home, planet Earth. And today, I think I'd like to talk a little bit about vehicles, in particular the so-called automobiles. In fact, they actually have an alternative name, and that is the car. It is thought that this comes from a reference to wheeled transport as drawn by horses. In fact, carts and horses became, I suppose, horseless carts eventually, and the car as a name was coined. But it seems that some people refer to these vehicles as automobiles, and for this dispatch, that's how we are going to continue. It is unfortunately unclear precisely when automobiles were invented. Unfortunately, some of the vehicular museums that we are aware of, for example the Smithsonian in the former United States, were lost during the incident. So it's difficult to put a firm granular understanding on the date for the invention of the automobile. However, by the mid 20th century, it is clear that huge road networks had been constructed explicitly for the ease of movement of these vehicles. This is obviously also a technology that is prior to the invention of anti-grav units. So, ground contact, the wheels touching the ground, was crucial, and so smooth surfaces were preferable. Indeed, some of these smooth surfaces were entirely ringed off, a closed loop of sorts, which we have come to the conclusion is akin to a Roman circus monument, a competitive event where people would take an automobile and race, essentially, not unlike some of the intercolonial space vehicular acrobatics and racing that we see today, most notably amongst our youth. Indeed, my colleague Dr. Singh has come up with a theory based on an observation, really, that perhaps there was a certain prestige linked with these sorts of races, and indeed a correlation between the less practical vehicles and the higher rates of fuel consumption. We must remember, of course, that these vehicles were fueled using a finite resource. They were using an oil-based product and burning it in combustion engines. And so consuming such a resource to us seems a strange thing to do in a recreational setting. It's okay for us to have races in so much as we have highly efficient batteries and renewable energy resources. But back then, the implications of using a huge amount of fuel to do a relatively small journey, or for example to go around in circles, may well in fact be best understood in the context of conspicuous consumption. That is to say, burning as much as you can in as little time as possible to show just how wealthy you are, and just how little you have to care, in so much as you, at this point, obviously there was a strong monetary incentive in economic systems, and so presumably if people had enough currency units, then they could afford to get more fuel for their vehicles. It's an interesting notion, and I think Dr. Singh is onto something. And frankly, this research should be pursued further. A notion we've been working on together, however, is the observation that in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, more and more people, no matter their economic status, seemingly had more regular access to new automobiles. We see quite a turnover of vehicles in the Great Middens and the stratigraphic record, and it seems less and less likely that people tolerated having vehicles that were much older than, say, 5 years. This again seems curious, given that we know that at the time there was a growing pressure rather on natural resources on planet Earth. But as ever, it seems that there was a pattern of exoticism, as we see in prehistory with, for example, stone tools, as we see with metallurgy in the Iron Age and Bronze Age. It seems that in the 20th and 21st centuries, people were less concerned with automobiles as practical tools and increasingly concerned with them as, well, again, status symbols, in fact. Even if people couldn't seemingly afford to burn through as much petroleum-based fuels as the more wealthy members of society, they nonetheless liked to have the latest designs. This is something that we also see, for example, in the cult of Apple that we've discussed in a previous dispatch. Now, before we judge our ancestors too harshly, it should be noted that this desire for the latest iteration of vehicle actually led to positive change and steps towards more efficient and more reliable, more renewable energy resources in vehicles. Indeed, the concept of the future was used to market, for example, electric cars to customers seemingly across the world. It's also a timely reminder for anyone, I think, that modern is indeed a moment in time. At some point in our future, people will look back upon us with a slightly raised eyebrow. I'm not quite sure what exactly they'll think we were doing strangely, but there'll be something. So automobiles, or cars, are a fascinating mode of transport, building on the many thousands of years old invention of the wheel in the Bronze Age, and going through something of a transformation from a more utilitarian workhorse of society to something a little bit more luxurious, something a bit more of a status symbol. What's interesting, though, is that in our research, one of the forward assessment units actually came across quite an anomaly, and we're not quite sure what to make of it just yet. Well, the sensor drone discovered this. Yeah. Now, this is mind-blowing. It raises all sorts of questions about people who we previously considered to be entirely mythological in history, and frankly, this is going to require more research. So I think we'll have to leave that there for today. But nonetheless, this is a very exciting strand of inquiry. I'm sure you'll agree. As ever, this has been a dispatch for the Council's consideration. Moon Recon Station Glean, signing off.
I've broken a sieve, I'm sorry to say. It speared me. As I broke it.
It wasn't particularly wetland.
Oh, love.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Don't have a
In the drawing box.
Trying to make it a condition like